Hey everyone, welcome to the HumAIn Workforce Podcast. I'm Sarah Lawrence, your host. This podcast delves into the impact of artificial intelligence on the workforce, in particular on job design. This is a podcast for HR professionals. However, if you're a business leader, a tech enthusiast, or simply curious about the future of work, you're also welcome here too. And today's guest is Simone Garrad. Simone is a co-founder and director of 9 Yards, a people and culture consultancy based in Melbourne, Australia. Simone brings over 20 years of experience in people and culture and has worked for Australian companies such as Medibank Private, Census, Australia Post, and Sportsbet. Simone has led the people and culture function for a prominent not-for-profit business in Melbourne, defining and delivering their people strategy. So thank you today for joining us, Simone. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about all things AI and in
Thanks for having me.
particular productivity and the impact on job design. So thank you
Yeah.
for being here.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So what I like to start with, Simone, is basically what is your current role and how did you get there?
Yeah, so as you said, Sarah, I am the co-founder and director of 9 Yards Consulting. So it is a consulting business based out of Melbourne, and we support business leaders and HR professionals with their people and culture. So that could be anything from a startup recruiting their first person and wanting to get some basic policies in place, right through to supporting existing HR teams in large organizations where they might have a specific project need or capability need. So we work across sectors, across sizes, and yeah, we're really hands-on, and I really love it.
That's awesome. And you've got a couple of other co-founders as well, don't you, in your consultancy?
Yeah, so Rochelle, Vivi, and Kira Clifford are my two co-founders. We all actually met. We were in a HR team together in-house, and for various reasons, one of them being my role getting made redundant, we just thought there's a real opportunity here to take the expertise we've learned in-house and take it out to businesses that might not get access to it otherwise. So we did that nearly 5 years ago. To set the scene, we launched the week before the first lockdown in Melbourne. So that gives you a good sense of the timing, but we're still alive and thriving. So it's great.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great to hear. So, on the topic of artificial intelligence, it seems to be everywhere at the moment. It seems to have picked up, in my view, a little bit of speed, I suppose, in the last 6 to 12 months. Probably more so with ChatGPT, which is one form of artificial intelligence. Um, what's your take on AI in general at the moment? And it's,
It
yeah.
Yeah, it is wild. And I think you're right. It is changing so quickly. I actually went to an AI masterclass on Wednesday, and I think I went in there going, I know a little bit about ChatGPT. I use it a bit, dabble with it, but I left being quite overwhelmed with the amount of different AI options there are and the actual capability that they all provide. It was quite like it's exciting, but quite overwhelming at the same time. And I think you're right. AI isn't just about business, though. It is everywhere. It's in every conversation, and people at all ages are using it. So, for example, my daughters are 11. They had to do leadership speeches for school, and they use ChatGPT to structure their speech. So that's 11-year-olds adopting this technology. And I even was listening to a mainstream podcast, which is more around kind of women and culture and things like that. And they were talking about how to use ChatGPT for, generating ideas for what to buy people for Christmas presents. So it is it's widespread. Everyone's using it. And I think I think it's the horse is almost bolted. So if you haven't, it's, I think, quite surprising because it is definitely out there and it's mainstream, especially at an individual level, I think.
Yeah. So, with the focus on, with your consultancy and assisting organizations, and you're saying it's broader because it affects all of us in every shape
Yeah.
and form now, really.
Yeah.
What are some of the impacts that you're seeing out at an organizational level in terms of AI products potentially being promoted to organizations? And then are you seeing a lot of that at the moment with companies sort of being approached or
Yeah, it's Look, and I'm smiling because I think it is so varied. So I think there are organizations that have basically mandated, and not my clients necessarily, but businesses I know of that have said we're not using Gen AI at all. It's not being used in our business. And I think there's a level of naivety there because I think the reality is their employees are probably using it and they're using
Mm,
ways that they don't know. So we can talk about that a bit later. But I think the other end of the extreme, there are a lot of organizations who are adopting platforms that often link to their tech platform. So, for example, Microsoft have introduced Copilot as their
mm.
AI tool, and a lot of organizations have adopted that. But I think the reality is there's varying levels of success with that. So, the ones that are investing in it in terms of embedding it, doing micro learning sessions, having champions in the business, are obviously having a bit more ROI or benefit being seen from it, whereas others are just kind of putting it out there and not really talking about, well, how are we going to work with it and what does this mean for us and how can we apply it? So I think there's, first of all, a bit of a spread in terms of who's actually accessing it. But there's also a spread in terms of what they're doing with it. But, Copilot is one example. But as I learnt on Wednesday, there are so many. Google have just launched Gemini, which is their
Yes.
equivalent. You've got
Mm.
Llama, which is the meta version. But you've also then got these really bespoke ones, such as Notebook LM, which is really about, you upload a text, like think of like a text that you'd have to read for uni or for work. And it then pulls out a summary with sources from where in the text they found it. And then you can actually translate that into a podcast if you prefer audio learning. So it translates that info into a podcast. And all this happens within 2 minutes. So there are so many unique offerings out there that are slightly different. And I think that in itself is a challenge for organizations and individuals to think about, A, what are they and what are the benefits of using different ones?
So then, in terms of HR teams in organizations at the moment, so there's a few things there with what you've said. There's the ethical side of it as well, isn't there, in terms of, no, we're not going to use this, we're not engaging with it. And as you said, there's a potential that employees have got another laptop there or something maybe, and just engaging it in another way and then using it without,
Yeah,
the organization knowing that.
yeah.
Um, and then there's ethical considerations around when you do engage with it. How do you engage with it? The privacy aspect of what sort of information are you actually putting in there as well. So I think sometimes employees need to be mindful, in my view, of how they use it with private company information as well. And is it locked down? So what are the security levels on all these different applications?
Totally. And I think that was something that I kind of knew intuitively, but when we kind of heard it more explicitly at this masterclass I went to, it really brought it to life in the sense that organizations need policies around this. AI is a natural extension to all the other policies like security and privacy that organizations have. And I think there is a real sense of understanding what are the principles or guardrails that organizations are wanting to work within when you think about AI. So, for example, putting company or customer private information in there would be something that no one would be endorsing. But if you don't have a kind of a principle around that, your organization or your employees may not know that that's not appropriate. So, I do think it starts with a policy and, for lack of a better word, guidelines or a philosophy or whatever that might be around your approach to AI, when and how you endorse it being used, if you do, and kind of what that looks like. Because I think from a protection point of view and a risk mitigation point of view, that's really critical. But I think in terms of a transparency view with your employees, I think it's really important because they need to know, like with anything else, how they can use it and what benefit they could get out of it.
Yeah, because ultimately, no one wants to do the wrong thing
Yeah,
with any of that, do they? Like, they're trying their best. People are under pressure to get things done. If there's a tool that can assist me to actually do things a bit more efficiently and maybe get a better outcome, that's going to be utilized. And if
exactly.
there aren't those boundaries, and then taking that a step further as well, from a HR point of view, what are the consequences then? So
That
if you don't have those guardrails in place, as you say, what are the consequences if there's misuse and information gets out, which may then impact the business into the future? It
Yeah, that,
may. And these are all the unknowns at the moment as well, aren't they? In
that's
terms of
right.
that side of it.
Yeah, and I think there was an example shared, and I'll probably harp on about this masterclass a bit because it was
No,
actually
it's
so great.
great.
But there was an example of someone putting kind of information into Chat GPT thinking it was closed down, but it was actually open. And that
Yeah.
information was, sensitive in nature and was suddenly public, in the public domain. So I do agree. I think we need to treat employees with respect and trust, but you also need to provide that support for them because it is a very uncertain area that we're working in. It is unknown. We've never worked in ways like this before. So you do need to provide that support and clarity to employees around what it means. Because I 100% agree. You can't really then go to the consequence part when we haven't been clear up front. So I do think expectations is really clear, and then you can kind of go from there. But it is interesting in that it is evolving so quickly. Like, no joke, you would look at something a week ago and there's a new feature or there's a new add-on. So I think that's part of the challenge for organizations is how do you stay up to date with the latest iteration of all of these things and kind of having a policy that's nimble enough to be flexible to move with it because some larger organizations where it takes a long time to kind of get a decision or steer a ship in a direction, it might be too late. It might be redundant by the time, it's launched. So I think having a
Yeah.
bit of philosophy or guidelines with a bit of flex in there, I think is going to be the key.
So it's about also, isn't it, further to that, they're going to miss out on the potential competitive advantage, which organizations do like.
Totally.
And if they might miss out on that if they don't engage with the technology, because AI, this is a space where I feel like and I say this all the time, the train has left the station. So you're either on board or you're not. And I think it's going to evolve into so, as you said, it's changing every single day. Updates, new things are coming through. If you're an employee at the moment in an organization, then, and all of this is happening, and just say you're on the scale of a late engager with technology and you're
Yeah.
not totally on board with engaging with new technology, how do you think HR teams in particular can support management? So, can support the CEO, the executive, their teams, their managers to assist employees with these changes that might come into with AI and changes in your role, and therefore impacts on employee well-being as well. Because whilst it can be great, it can be also very overwhelming, Simone.
Oh, and I don't underestimate that for a second. I think there is an element of it being so uncertain, and I think there's different views on AI. You could read views that it is quite alarmist, but there's other views that it is going to be really positive and it's going to really evolve work. So I definitely appreciate as an employee sitting in an organization, there's probably going to be a level of concern and worry about what this means for them and their role down the track. In terms of how to tackle this, I guess I have a view that if we go a macro view first, my advice to clients I'm working with at the moment is, and to anyone who'd listen really, is again coming back to think about what this means for your sector and your business. So at a high level, what are the possibilities for AI for this sector? Because that comes back to your question or comment around competitor advantage. If everyone else in your industry or sector is embracing this technology, you are going to get left behind. So you do need to think about what it means at that level. Then you also need to then think about the nuances of what that means for teams within your organization. So what I've learned is that there are different tools that will be applicable to different tasks, to different teams. And so it's not a one size fits all. So you then have to really strategically think about, well, let's now go bottom up at a role level,
Mm.
the tasks within a role like what do they look like? Are they ones that could be automated? Are they
Mm.
ones that could be augmented? So with a bit of human intervention, but you could do a bit from a technological perspective, or are they primarily human driven? And once you have an understanding of each of those kind of components, you can then look at the ones that could be automated to go, well, what AI tool could potentially help that piece of the pie? And it's a puzzle, right? Like it's not one size fits all. It might not be one tool for the whole organization, let alone within a role. So I think there is an element of talking to leaders and kind of sharing some of these ideas with them. It can be a bit overwhelming, but I think getting them around, getting their heads around the fact that, we've got to look at kind of tasks that might, impact roles. We've got to look at what this means from a sector perspective. We also need to look at culturally, what do you want it to be? What does this
Mm.
mean for you and your customers? How transparent are you around that? What are the risks? I think that macro view first will then kind of really drive some of the activity that sits within organizations. And my advice to, clients has been to date, if we don't know, let's get someone in to help us. Who's an expert that can actually help guide the exec team around having these conversations, because there's a risk if we don't do it. There's a risk if we do it and we do it wrong. And, it's fraught with a lot of questions. So let's get the expertise if we need it.
Yeah. And I think that's a great way of approaching it, that advice that you're giving there, because it's around no one's really got the answers to any of this. And because it can feel so overwhelming, all collectively, I think the answers will lie collectively
Yeah.
in different people's views and bringing them together. And whether that's at like a managerial or executive level to begin with, but then engaging employees in that as well, because it will impact their job design. And I think as HR professionals, that's going to be a very tricky task potentially with getting the engagement into, well, what is our level engagement in AI? But then going into the micro. So you sort of described the macro part, but if they go off and say, yes, we're going full steam ahead with these AI products, this is what we want to do. HR team, can you now tell us what the impact on the jobs are? So
Oh,
then that goes into, from my perspective, a workforce planning view
yeah.
of the skills, the capabilities. But the biggest challenge I've found over the years with the workforce planning part is how do you segment your workforce? So, how do you segment the roles? And then how do you break all of that down? And I'm talking probably in organizations that are a bit more medium to large size. When
Yeah.
in the smaller organizations, that's going to be easier to do. But one of the things I look at, Simone, is like job families,
Mm.
for example, and go, okay, well, what are all your job families? What are the core capabilities required in those job families? How do you break that down into role?
Mm.
So, position goes down into that detail. And then eventually it goes into, we all love markers to hold on to in HR, I
Yeah.
think. I'm speaking generally, but like it comes back to people's job description
Yeah.
at the end point. Like that's the last end point, but your job description isn't necessarily your job design.
No. And
So
yeah,
what challenges do you think there are going to be for HR teams around like taking it from the macro into, the practical stuff, the into that micro view of how it's going to actually be embedded into people's roles?
yeah, look, I think you're exactly right. It's going to be a real challenge for HR teams. But I think if we take a step back and think about the use of chatbots in service roles.
Mm,
That was an example of adopting new technology in a way we hadn't before, that in a way kind of automated roles. We have done elements of this in the past. And I think we would use the same philosophies around that in terms of, and I think you're exactly right. You have job families, you have roles within job families, but the next level is really the tasks within those roles.
mm,
And again, looking at what are they? what are the activities that sit within it, and what can be automated, augmented, or what is really important from a human perspective. And I think the challenge will be for organizations, is there a system that can help us really analyze and pull those insights really quickly? Are there things that they're doing already in terms of those kind of activities that we can leverage? That will be a conversation around that. But I do agree, it is going to be a change in the way HR people potentially have to think about it. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I do believe that, sometimes you tend to, think if you've got a vacancy in your team, you tend to go, we've just got to replace that. But actually, are we critically looking at what is that role meant to do? What are the outputs we expect of it? What are the activities that break that up? And I think good HR people are, looking at those roles to go, is there a component of that we can potentially outsource? Or is there something that can be done differently around that? Can we automate a piece of it? And we should have been having those conversations already. So my take is, it will be a different way of thinking about it, but it should be an evolution, because we should have been having some of these conversations already.
Yeah. So really then, from what I'm hearing from you, the change management part of this is going to be quite significant as well. So there's the first part where HR teams are going to be tasked with having to segment the workforce, understand the job families, the roles that they've got, the tasks and the capabilities within those roles down into that detail, splitting it up into what areas are impacted by AI, so overlaying AI onto that. And then out of that, there's going to be potential changes to people's roles,
Yep.
which will require a level of change management as well, won't it? That change management layer to come in
Yeah.
and say, this is how you're going to be impacted. And then there's a decision point from organisations as to the next step after that might be, well, this role's changed quite significantly. So what is the impact there? How can we upskill people? Because there's a potential here to actually reskill, upskill, whatever you want to call it, into other areas for roles. So, or they might make the decision that, no, we don't, AI is going to take that part of it. And so that's going to create a lot of stress. It comes back to the whole well-being piece for me in
Yeah.
terms of managing this whole thing. Because if organizations do this on large scale all at once, because they're all competing against each other, there's a potential future where a lot of roles become obsolete. They don't get reskilled. There's no opportunity for that. And AI becomes quite a significant employee within the organization.
Yeah. And
So
look,
there's that potential future as well, isn't there, in terms
totally.
of,
And to be honest, I'm a bit of an optimist by nature. So I may be, and I'll put my hand up if I'm wrong in 10 years' time. But I think I like to see it as an evolution of how we work, and really being able to pull out elements of a role that low impact, low value add, or that just take a lot of time, that then allows the individual in that role to actually innovate more, or think about how you could do that role differently, or what that could mean. So that's kind of the frame I bring to it. But I don't disagree with you at all that this is going to have an impact on employees. And if I take a step back in terms of how I would view this, good HR people and really strong exec teams who truly value their people always think about employee engagement and well-being as front of mind, regardless of the lens they look at it through. So the lens recently might have been hybrid work, or it could be, are we creating a psychosocial environment that is safe for our employees? I view AI as another lens that, like in a viewfinder, that they have to now consider this through. But I do agree that this might pose a level of concern for employees. So you need to have, really open and transparent conversations with your team. You need to be honest. You need to talk about what this means for your organization. You need to be honest that you might not have all the answers, but, we will commit to always telling you when we kind of change our approach or what it could mean. Because I think staying silent is being not realistic about it. But I think also the extreme of being alarmist, we're saying, we envisage 50% of our roles are going to be impacted is probably too extreme as well. But I think you need to kind of play in that grey of saying, this is where we're at, this is what we're doing. We commit to keeping you updated and informed, but, this is how we are going to approach it. Because I think the reality is no one really knows what the outcome could be, and you just need to take people on that journey.
Yeah, I think it's really important for HR people at the moment, isn't it, to keep their finger on the pulse with this one
Yeah.
in terms of education in the AI space too. So actually understanding the tools yourself, isn't it? So do you think it could be a basic thing for HR people just to do to get back to how is AI impacting HR?
Yeah. And I
So
think
starting there, maybe and just going, how is these tools that we've got or potentially going to use, how does that impact HR as a function
that's right. And I
and
think
role?
absolutely you need to understand the tech, first of all.
Mm,
That would be my first advice is embrace it, even if it's scary. Kind of think about how can you learn more about it, and whether that's reading or listening to podcasts or committing to buying a paid, month of each of the tools and, YouTubing the best way to use it, whatever it could be. Play around with it to start to see the benefits and then think about, well, what would this mean for an employee in my team? If I'm using it this way in HR, what could we do as a function? But broadly, what could be the benefit of this or the application of this across the business? And I think that literacy around it is going to be really critical because, like I said, everyone's using it anyway in some form.
mm,
So as a HR team, you need to be honest and open about that to go, well, if they're doing it, we need to understand it. So that would be my first starting point. And as a HR function, if you're not sure, which is totally fine because it is so new and it is quite
yeah.
wild, is get some advice in and get some expertise in and get someone to help you through that process. Because I think once you get an understanding of the tools and you play around with it, you can then start to realize the benefits of it. For example, in ChatGPT, I didn't realize that you can upload a data file and then basically ask it to analyze that data for you. What are the 3 insights you can pull from this? Can you graph this? Can you do that? So, it's pulling out the same things that you would do in Excel yourself, but it's just doing it in a more intuitive way. And, I think there are different ways to always get to an endpoint. And I think AI is showing that there are, efficient and different ways. And as HR people, we need to embrace it and be open to that.
Yeah. And I think it comes back to as well for people in general, like any employee now, it's about that lifelong learning, isn't it? Like, back in the day, you could go on a course and then you could learn some stuff and you might come back and use a bit of it. And then you get back to your job and you're not really still learning, or that's just, not everyone, but just some people could be like that. Whereas now, it's kind of like lifelong learning with your job to evolve with it, because it
Yes.
will be important to evolve with, in my view, with artificial intelligence and seeing it as another employee in the organization, really,
Oh,
isn't it?
and,
It's sort of
and
like another employee that
well,
you're
it kind of
engaging with.
100%. And the AI was designed to be a companion. And, it was interesting. They even spoke about
Yeah, companion.
it's designed to be a friendly companion. So it will be very rare that your ChatGPT message will come back with a negative comment because
Mm,
it's designed to be supportive, and I think there's always going to be unintended consequence of technology, and I'm sure that may play out. But for the moment, I think you need to view it as that. And it is, it was really interesting is even thinking about, crediting AI. If you're doing something in it and it's a majority AI generated piece of work, where does obligation lie in crediting it? Or, therefore, what do you use it for? So I think there's
mm,
so many implications to this and how it will play out. But, as a starting point, even for HR people, I would just say, stay clear of, confidential and sensitive data.
Yes.
You wouldn't want to be putting anything sensitive in there at all. If you want to kind of use it and try it out, desensitize all of that information, because the same privacy rules do apply to this data that goes into AI. So that would be my first kind of tip. But secondly, I think the real benefit of it is in that ideation space and that creativity space and pulling out, helping you create templates and things like that. And I've already seen myself that some of the benefits of doing that, because what it allows me to do is instead of spending 2 hours on something, I can get the frame in 5 minutes. And then that rest of the time is really deep thinking and critical analysis of, well, how am I going to approach it then? So my clients are getting better outcomes. I'm doing more interesting work. And I think I'm definitely seeing the benefit and the win out of that.
Yeah, that's such fantastic tips and advice that you're giving there. It's amazing. It's really great, Simone, like to give HR people, which is what we're about, trying to help the HR community here. Think
Yeah.
about, where can they start with
Yeah.
this? So it's just starting, isn't it? Exploring, investigating. Um,
Totally.
Nothing's perfect. You're going to get things, it could be clunky, but that's okay.
Yeah,
And just
totally.
give it a go and just explore. And then as an employee, if we view it as an employee, treating it like that too, treating it with respect. So saying thank you, please.
Well,
Like
it's really interesting that
that's
one.
how I view it anyway. It's sort of like a person, like
Yeah.
in a way.
And it needs to be guided. So it was a really interesting tip was, if you get something generated out of ChatGPT or Claude, for example, which is very similar to ChatGPT, is to say good job, because then it knows that that's actually reinforcing that you're kind of getting the information that you need. So, it was just quite interesting to think about it like that.
Yeah,
And to be honest, people use technology in that way now. We use Siri, we use Alexa. People are already using technology like
yeah,
this
absolutely, without realizing it.
without
Already
realizing
using
it.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that I do caution that kind of alarmist view that, it could be so detrimental to society. And I hand on my heart hope that it never gets to that.
Yeah.
But I think if we can look at the benefits of it and see how we can then create efficiencies and productivity to free people up to do really great stuff, I think that could be the competitive edge that organizations need from not only a market perspective, but an employee perspective. This could be a real attraction and retention tool for employees. If they know that organizations kind of embrace this technology, they're willing to explore and test and, work within it, that could be the difference with people going, that's an innovative place and that's where I want to be.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I agree. I think working with is the
Yeah,
way forward,
exactly.
isn't it? And treating
Yeah.
it like an employee and the thanks and as you said, good job. And then no, you're reinforcing the behavior, I suppose,
Yeah. Yeah.
that
At a simplistic level. Yeah.
and it's thinking, oh, gee, this human being's nice. I'm going to help it out more.
Yeah.
It's almost, I see it always, you eventually like create a relationship with the AI in some shape or form and say thank you. And then it thinks, oh, well, this is great. Like I'm helping
Yeah.
you out and fantastic. So treating it with respect and you'll get respect back.
Yeah, and I think it's only as good as, kind of the prompts you ask and the questions
Yeah.
you put in and the information that you provided. So it is a tool, and I don't think it would ever replace a brainstorming session with your colleagues or anything like that. But I think it gives you good input. It helps with research. It helps synthesize information. And depending on what sector you're in or what, types of roles or information your team have to work through, that could be actually a real time saver for them to allow them to focus on whether it's client interaction or critical thinking of data. So, this could be something that you need to be open to, even though it's scary and it's really messy and it's moving every day. You do need to start to think about what it could look like.
Yeah, that's all really great tips that you've given there. Thank you so much, Simone. Like that's really given the HR community, I think, a lot of things to think about and just where to start, really,
Yeah.
which is fantastic. So, where can people find you if they want to seek your assistance and find out more about what you've got to offer?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on LinkedIn, but Nine Yards has also just revamped our website. So we are at nine-yards.com.au. There's a lot of info about our offering, but we also do blogs regularly, and that gives some kind of our take on what's happening in the market, what's happening from a P&C perspective. So those would probably be the best places to look for us.
Fantastic. That's excellent. Thank you so much for your time today. And I wish you and Nine Yards all the best with all the work that you're doing into the future, and especially helping HR people out there.
And look, thanks, Sarah. It was great to chat. And, thanks to you for putting this out there. I think it is an emerging area and a lot of people don't know where to start. And I think podcasts like this that are really targeted to HR people are really useful. So great job.
Oh, thanks, Simone. Great. See you later.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.